Thank you very much for the introduction, Moran. I'm absolutely humbled to be able to speak to you today, and I'm also privileged to happen to be the coordinator of the SoFAIR project, which has been already introduced by Roberto. The SoFAIR project is about open scholarly infrastructures working closely together in order to achieve the building of explicit links between research studies and software. And of course, you won't be surprised that it includes and involves the use of software heritage. So when we study nature and natural processes and natural laws, we try to understand processes that happen reliably every time when we repeat them. And therefore, single occurrences that cannot be reproduced are of little or pretty much no significance to science. A study of Baker, which is incredibly famous, from 2016, which involved a survey of 1,500 scientists, revealed that more than 70% of researchers have tried and failed actually to reproduce another scientist's experiments. That's really sad, but actually 50% have failed to reproduce even their own experiments. And we can be very much asking, like, why could that be the case? The majority of scientists also replied that there is a significant reproducibility crisis. And when they were asked about what might be the reasons for this crisis, then they gave a lot of justifications. And some of those are difficult to deal with. But there's one which is absolutely a precondition for being able to resolve and mitigate that problem. And it is also relatively high on the list, and that is the fact that the unavailability of research software was reported as a very significant reason. Effectively, if I cannot, there's the vast majority of research studies rely on software. And if we cannot find if the scientists cannot even locate where their software is, then it will be very difficult for them to reproduce a research study. So I'm getting to what the goal of the SoFAIR project is and what is its problem. And so the really key issue that we're facing is that it's not surprising for researchers at the moment to understand that every research manuscript gets registered, it gets a persistent identifier, it's recognized, it's a lot of effort, an incredible amount of research teams goes into the writing of the manuscripts, and because the manuscripts are also those objects that get peer-reviewed and scrutinized very deeply, we pay a lot of attention to them as scientists. But we don't pay that level of attention to software at all. And I think that that might be a problem, or I'm convinced that that is a problem, one of those many big problems. So what we want to do in the research, what we want to help with in the SoFAIR project, is we want to make software first-class bibliographic records, basically. We want software to be recognized, we want them to have persistent identifiers, and we, of course, absolutely need research software to be linked to the research papers so that we would be able to navigate from a research paper to the research software. And the SoFAIR project tries to achieve it. It is a project which is it's a 2-year internationally funded project in the EU, but funded by national funders. It involves 5 partners, and it involves from 4 countries, and it involves also the use of several key sort of open scholarly infrastructures. Our approach is to build everything on open protocols and on open scholarly infrastructures so that we wouldn't be dependent in the future on other things, and also it's about being able to build something that is sustainable. So if we're building a workflow that could effectively be changed and that will be here fit for the future and well documented. So before I actually go on this slide, I wanted to ask you, can you raise your hand if you know what software heritage is? Okay, very good. If someone is not raising your hand, then I refer you to Moran and Roberto, okay? And therefore, I will take the privilege of not talking about software heritage. I will only talk about the other very important infrastructure in the SoFAIR project, which is CORE. And CORE is an infrastructure which indexes all open access research papers around the world. It focuses, it is the world's most used scholarly database with over 30 million monthly active users. It's a not-for-profit scholarly infrastructure which is dedicated to the sort of open access mission, and it is also, as many open infrastructures are, a signatory to the principles of open scholarly infrastructures, or so-called POSI principles. It really serves the global network of repositories. It has also this sort of community governance approach. And here are some statistics about CORE. It provides content access to about 300 million metadata records, 335 million plus full text documents. The full texts are particularly important because the full texts, within every full text of a research paper, there is typically some mention of software. This mention can be explicit, it can be implicit, it can be sometimes quite difficult to find it, and it can be very time-consuming to find those mentions. What we want to do in the SoFAIR project is that we're building AI, machine learning models, among the other things, and we're trying to, for these models, we are trying to teach them how to find a specific mention of a software so that we could then effectively find a way of registering this software and locating it in software heritage. What I want to do now is to tell you a little bit about the workflow, and I will go a little bit step by step, basically. So in the first step of a typical research journey is that the scientist, who also writes the manuscript eventually, is developing some software which they might use for the analysis, or maybe they use it as a precondition of the study that they are making. Eventually, the manuscript gets written and it gets deposited into one of the open access repositories. What we do then is that CORE then takes that, and CORE effectively, at that point, the source code might exist, for instance, on GitLab or GitHub or any of the other repositories, and the manuscript gets also indexed by CORE, and I'm desperately trying to move the slide, and I succeeded. When it gets to CORE, it's the time for running some of the machine learning processes, because we can scan the manuscript and we can identify whether that manuscript contains basically some mentions of software. And there is a tool within CORE which is called the CORE Repository Dashboard, which basically is a tool that effectively enables access to those who administer repositories. When I talk about repositories, I mean preprint repositories. I also mean primarily institutional repositories. So if you don't know, if you're not in this area, almost every university in the world has an institutional repository where their research papers are supposed to be deposited. And so we have a contact to this person, and what we try to do, we use an open protocol to send a notification to that repository, so that that repository which sits, let's say, it could be, for instance, in France, it would be Hull. It sits there basically, and it can notify the specific author, sending them an email, effectively saying, we think that you might have created a new research software. We have extracted the metadata, and they seem like this. Can you confirm that this software has been created by yourself? And so the author then, at that point, would be able to confirm that they have effectively, really, they indeed are the creators of that software, if everything goes well, or say, no, I have not created that software, in which case that software would not be attributed to them, of course. But if they did, then it would basically send a notification to Software Heritage, a PID would be associated with that manuscript, and we would learn forever that there is a link basically between this software and the research publication. So that's, in a sense, the overall idea and the orchestration of processes that we have in the SoFAIR project. So in conclusions, identifying and sort of archiving research papers and software assets and links between them is crucial for reproducibility. I focused on reproducibility, but there is another really important aspect why this is important, which was already mentioned by Roberto in some of the previous sessions, and that is giving credit to the people who also create research software. These people often within universities don't have, even though they are absolutely needed because research teams are getting bigger and bigger these days, they don't typically have promotion or career journeys in the way as many academics do. And I think that we deserve to give these people more recognition. It's also about using AI models to extract software mentions from manuscript. I told you we are building some sort of innovative technologies in this space. And finally, we are really documenting the SoFAIR workflow and building it on top of open protocols so that it could potentially, doesn't need to be repository system dependent. It could apply, for instance, then to, it could work the same way on HAL, on DSpace, on ePrints, and many other repository platforms. So, thank you very much for this opportunity. I really treasure it, and that's all from me.